it seemed, sit well with the instincts of many Americans, and there had been rises in petty crime rates all over the country. Otherwise law-abiding people seemed suddenly struck by a desire to perform small illegal acts, littering, jaywalking, as if to prove they were still free despite the authorities' assumed scrutiny. And local cops were learning to be tolerant of this. It was just a token of liberties defended, but Bobby supposed it was healthy. He reached the main street. Animated images on tabloid vending machines urged him to download their latest news for just $10 a shot. He eyed the seductive headlines. There was some serious news, local, national, and international. It seemed that the town was getting over an outbreak of cholera, related to stress on the water supply, and was having some trouble assimilating its quota of sea level rise relocates from Galveston Island, but the serious stuff was mostly swamped by tabloid trivia. A local member of Congress had been forced out of office by a worm cam exposure of sexual peccadillos. She had been caught pressuring a high school football hero, sent to Washington as a reward for his sporting achievements, into another form of athletics. But the boy had been over the age of consent. As far as Bobby was concerned, the representative's main crime in this dawning age of the worm cam was stupidity. Well, she wasn't the only one. It was said that 20% of members of Congress and almost a third of the Senate had announced they would not be seeking re-election, or would retire early, or had just resigned outright. Some commentators estimated that fully half of all America's elected officials might be forced out of office before the worm cam became embedded in the national and individual consciousness. Some said this was a good thing, that people were being frightened into decency. Others pointed out that most humans had moments they would prefer not to share with the rest of mankind. Perhaps in a couple of electoral cycles, the only survivors among those in office, or prepared to run for office, would be the pathologically dull, with no personal lives to speak of at all. No doubt the truth, as usual, would be somewhere between the extremes. There was still some coverage of last week's big story, the attempt by unscrupulous White House aides to discredit a potential opponent of President Juarez at the next election campaign. They had worm-cammed him sitting on the john with his trousers down his ankles, picking his nose and extracting fluff from his navel. But this had rebounded on the voyeurs and had done no damage to Governor Beauchamp at all. After all, everybody had to use the john, and probably nobody, no matter how obscure, did so now without wondering if there was a worm cam viewpoint looking down, or worse, up at her. Even Bobby had taken to using the lavatory in the dark. It wasn't easy, even with the new, easy-use, touch-textured plumbing that was rapidly becoming commonplace, and he sometimes wondered if there was anybody in the developed world who still had sex with the lights on. He doubted that even the supermarket tabloid vendors would persist with such paparazzi exposure as the shock value wore off. It was telling that these images, which would have been shockingly revealing just a few months ago, now blared multicolored in the middle of the afternoon from stands in the main street of this Mormon community, unregarded by almost everyone, young and old, children and churchgoers alike. It seemed to Bobby that the worm cam was forcing the human race to shed a few taboos, to grow up a little. He walked on. The Mays' home was easy to find. Before this otherwise nondescript house in a nondescript residential street here in the middle of classic small-town America, he found the decades-old symbol of fame, or notoriety, a dozen or so news crews gathered before the white-painted picket fence that bordered the garden. Instant access worm cam technology or not, it was going to take a long time before the news-watching public was weaned off the interpretive presence of a reporter interposing herself before some breaking news story. Bobby's arrival, of course, was a news event in itself. Now the journalists came running toward him, drone cameras bobbing above them like angular metallic balloons, snapping questions. "Bobby, this way, please. Bobby, is it true that this is the first time you've seen your mother since you were 3 years old? Is it true your father doesn't want you here, or was that scene in Our World boardroom just a setup for the worm cams? Bobby! Bobby smiled, as evenly as he could manage. The reporters didn't try to follow him as he opened the small gate and walked through the fence. After all, there was no need. No doubt 1,000 worm cam viewpoints were trailing him even now. He knew there was no point asking for respect for his privacy.